Hi, welcome to Introduction to a Beehive, where I'm going to take you into our beehive that we have right here on our suburban permaculture food forest. We just got these bees a couple weeks ago, so I'm going to take you through the hive and show you some pictures and videos. So we're going to start with meeting the types of bees that are in the hive. So what kind of bees are in there? Then we're going to go over the work of the hive. So some of the jobs that some of the workers do in the hive. I'm going to show you some videos of the hive, and then I'm going to give you an at-home activity to do and some resources if you want to learn more about bees. So here we're going to meet the bees. We're going to go over the queen, who is arguably the most important part of the hive, the drones, the workers, and in that worker category we're also going to go over what nurse bees are, foragers, comb builders, queen attendants, guard bees, etc. So let's start with the queen. You can see our queen here, she's marked with green, but a way to spot the queen, and there's only one queen in the whole hive, so between 30 and 50,000 bees are in the hive, and only one of those bees is a queen. So here you can see the queen. She's marked with this green dot, but she's bigger than the other bees, as you can see. She's longer. She's got this really long abdomen. Her wings only go about halfway down, and she's got this bald spot on her back, this big bald spot. You can tell the difference between her and a worker bee because the worker bees have kind of like a fuzziness on their back. Hers is bald. It's hard to see with this green spot. But all surrounding her are other bees. So she is the queen bee. She lays all of the eggs in the entire hive, and that's her job. She can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day when a lot of nectar is coming in. So she's kind of important. Without the queen, the hive dies. But when she dies and gets old, the worker bees create a new queen. So it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool process. So that's the queen. Next we have the drones. The drones are the male bees. They only make up about 10% of the total hive. So if you've got about 50,000 bees, only about 5,000 of them are going to be males. But they're pretty easy to spot too because they're bigger than the worker bees and they're almost as big as the queen, but they don't have as long of an abdomen as the queen. They have a shorter abdomen. They kind of look short and squat compared to the queen, but they're bigger and they have these massive eyes, like these big eyes that take up their entire top of their head. So they're pretty easy to spot if you look for them. So on here, this is the bee we're going to look at. This is a drone. Do you see how his eyes are just basically taking up the entire top of his head? And if you compare him to these eyes are smaller and further apart than these big eyes. So we can see a couple of drones on this picture. Here's a drone here. Here's a drone here. There's another one here, even though this guy's blurry because he was moving. There's another drone down here. So there are lots of drones on this frame. And the reason being is the drones don't really do anything. They are from an unfertilized egg, so they are basically an exact genetic copy of the queen herself. And they're on this frame because there's lots of nectar and pollen on this frame, so they're eating. I kind of call them freeloaders. They're really, really important for the survival of hives all over the place, but they don't do any work. All they do is try to find other queens to mate with. Otherwise, they just kind of take nectar and honey all the time out of the hive. At the end of the season, so when we go into winter, the female workers actually kick all of the drones out and they end up dying. So any of the drones that don't end up mating end up getting kicked out. And when they do mate, they die. They die in the process of mating with another queen. So it's pretty interesting. Drones are pretty interesting bees, and they're kind of lumbering. They don't fly very well. They kind of look like these bumbling flying things. But they're really cool to spot too, because you can definitely see that they're bigger and they got these big eyes. They're really cool. All right. Next we have the workers, which are 90% of what's in the hive. The worker bees are what do all of the work in the hive, and we'll go over some of the jobs they do. But as I said before, here's a drone and here's a worker. So the workers are all female and they're all from fertilized eggs. The queen can mate with up to 12 to 15 different drones. So she can choose which sperm she puts in with the eggs and create different worker bees. So the worker bees can be all different colors as well, but they're smaller and they've got smaller eyes, and they're generally the ones doing all of the work. So you can see some different patterns in here. There's some bees that have these darker lines, and then there's bees that are more this color. I call them honey colored. So this type of bee has black stripes, and this one has basically tan and brown stripes. So it's like a honey colored worker bee. So you'll see a lot more genetic diversity within the workers. But yep, they're smaller and they have smaller eyes. And of those workers, you can have, they do all sorts of different jobs, and we're going to kind of go over the different jobs in the next slide. But we have nurse bees, and you can see these are all nurse bees because on this frame, we see all of the larvae. You can see the larvae inside of these, inside the honeycomb. And you have the nurse bees sticking their butt out. They're feeding the larvae. So on a frame where there's all eggs and larvae, you're going to see nurse bees because nurse bees are the ones that are feeding the larvae. And then you have comb building bees. They are the ones that produce wax and they build comb. And then you have what we call attendant bees, and they're the bees that surround the queen. So all these bees right here are the bees surrounding the queen, and they feed her, they give her water, they protect her, they shade her from sun, they do all sorts of things, and they follow her around, basically. They're her attendants, and they're always facing her. You can see generally when you're looking for the queen, all the bees are facing her. Her attendants are facing her, so nobody's facing away, so they create this kind of like circle around her. It's pretty cool. All right, so work of the hive. There's a lot of jobs that workers do, and I'm only going to go over a couple of them. But some of the most important jobs are raising new bees, building comb, making honey, and what I call bee cake, but also you can call it bee bread. It's called bee bread, and then collecting nectar and pollen. So let's start with raising new bees. Like I said, these are worker bees that are nurse bees. And their job is to protect the larva and the eggs. So the queen comes, and in each of these honeycombs, she lays an egg. After she lays it, it's set in this thing called royal jelly, okay? So the egg is sitting in that royal jelly, and once it hatches, the larva starts to eat the royal jelly, and then they're fed nectar and pollen by the nurse bees. That's why there's this nurse bee with their butt sticking out. They've got all this food that they're feeding the larva, and the larva grows and grows and grows, and then they cap it with wax, and it forms a pupa, kind of like a chrysalis, I would say, like if you're trying to compare it to a butterfly. And then after a while, a few days, they hatch out of their cell, and they eat the wax all around the outside. So these are nurse bees. Their other job is to keep the larva warm. So if it's really, really cold, they'll cluster around some of the larvae. That's not really what they're doing right here, but they could be. But they'll cluster around to keep the body heat in, so they keep the larva the correct temperature. It's really important that the larva and the eggs stay at a certain temperature, otherwise they will die. So that's the nurse bees. Then, obviously, building comb. So at a certain age, worker bees can produce wax from they have these glands in their abdomen that secrete wax. And they become, once they can secrete wax, they become the comb builders. And what they're doing right here, so this is brand new comb. And I'll show you, I'll go back. So this is also new comb. But you can see over time it gets kind of yellow. And the older the comb is, the darker it becomes. So it'll start to turn brown after a while, after it's been used a lot. So it goes from white to yellow to brownish. This is brand new comb that doesn't have anything in it, so it is white as white can be. And what they're doing right here is called festooning. And they're making this structure basically with their bodies to help them build the comb. So they're like holding on with legs and feet, and they're piling all on top of each other to build this comb off the top of this frame. And it's called festooning. It's really cool. So after they're nurse bees and then comb builders, they become foragers, but we'll talk about that in a second. So another job is making the honey and the bee cake from the collecting of the pollen and the nectar. So on this frame, you can see all of this dark stuff is nectar. And that's why it's got this reflection, because it's liquidy. It's nectar from flowers. And down here, and even in these random frames, this is all pollen. So you can see the different colors of pollen. Depending on what flowers they got the pollen from, it becomes different colors. And then inside of that, they spit these enzymes in and these natural yeasts into the pollen, and it basically ferments it like it's fermenting bread, like it's rising. So it'll rise and actually make this little cake, or they mix it with enzymes and nectar, and they'll actually make this little cake. Well, I would like to think it's cake because they add sweet nectar to it. But it ferments and makes this nutritious cake that they then feed to not only to themselves, but to the baby bees. So it's really cool. They make this little cake. It's perfect, and the pollen has the protein. So the nectar has most of the sugars and carbohydrates, while the pollen has lots of the protein that they eat to sustain them. So this is a frame that has just nectar and pollen on it. And you saw earlier there's a frame with just babies on it. So they kind of build out their comb and have it for different uses. And then the most important, to sustain the whole hive, the worker bees have to collect nectar and pollen. And so they go out and they collect both, and you can see there's lots of pollen on this girl's head. She's collecting that pollen and sticking her proboscis in. You can kind of see it in here, collecting the nectar. And she'll take her legs, see these legs, they're called pollen pants. And she'll take her legs, clean the pollen off of her head, and stick it in basically her back pocket on her hind legs, called pollen pants. She adds a little nectar to it to make it harder and stick together so that it'll stay on her hind legs, and then she carries it back to the hive. So I'm going to show you guys some videos that I took of the hive. They are a little blurry. When I converted them to this presentation, they became a little bit blurry. But I want to show you the entrance to the hive and what goes on in the entrance. So let's play this video. So this is a slow-mo video as well. So you can see the bees coming in. Some of them are going to have pollen. And you can see they're a little clumsy. They bonk themselves a lot. They're not very precise with how they fly. But also in here you can see there's this bee right here, and they're cleaning each other. There's guard bees that stand by the entrance, and they sniff all the bees that come in. And if they don't belong, they kick them out or they sting them. And then they also clean the bees that come in. So if there's any bees that have stuff all over them, pollen or other stuff that's not wanted, the guard bees will clean them off and then send them on their way to do their job. So this is the entrance to the hive. It's very busy during the afternoon. And yeah, you can see them coming in and leaving, and even being a little bit clumsy as they come out. I think this one falls. One of them falls. It's pretty silly. And yep, it's busy. All right, next we have the queen. So I'm just going to show you a video of what we call the brood nest or the brood frame. Generally, the queen is not found on any of the frames that have honey and pollen because her attendants feed her, so there's no need for her to go on those frames. So when you're looking for the queen, you want to look where all the babies are, and you're likely to find her. So this is just a quick video of her brood nest. And you can see all the baby larvae and all the bees with their butts hanging out, feeding the larvae. And that's the queen. So you can see her long, long abdomen and short wings, and there's always bees surrounding her and facing her, feeding her, crawling on her. She's a pretty important part of the hive. And then we've got all these larvae and lovely bees taking care of the larvae. All right. On to this video is of the bees drinking. So what's really cool is the bees tend to go to the same exact places to drink. They find a good place and then they all kind of congregate there. So these are some bees in slow-mo coming in for a drink. And this is actually on our pond waterfall. During the day, we turn the waterfall down to basically a trickle, and the bees come in and they take a drink. And what they do is they not only drink for themselves, but they carry water back to the hive to feed some of the other bees and the queens. But they also take water back to the hive on really hot days to cool the hive down. So think of it as like a water mister. When you're really hot and you mist yourself with water, it gets a lot cooler. They do the same thing in the summertime. When it's really hot and dry, they'll carry this water back to cool down the hive. So they take the water and then they fan their wings like a fan and it cools down the hive. But this is the watering hole that they like to visit along with the birds. They come and they go from this water hole all afternoon. And sometimes they bump into each other. All right. So that's it for the introduction to the hive. So I want you guys to do an at-home activity this week. I want you to find some honeybees, especially since it's springtime. And if you're watching this video in the spring, it's the best time to find honeybees. They are the most active in early to late spring. So find some honeybees, and I want you to observe them. Don't touch them. I want you to observe them and record your answers to the following questions in your nature journal. So what color are they? Where did you find them? What time of day did you find them? What do they appear to be doing? What sound do they make? What color are their wings? Are they alone or are they in a group? What types of flowers do they appear to like? And then draw the bee you observe or take a picture and add it to your nature journal. And then I want you to research the types of flowers bees love and record them in your nature journal, because it's really important that bees have enough to eat, otherwise the hive will not survive. So a fun fact is that bees need anywhere from 60 to 100 pounds of honey at the end of the summer to survive the winter. So they need a lot of honey to make it through the winter. So they have to collect all of that honey over the spring and the summer months in order to survive the winter, because they can't fly during the winter. It's too cold. So another activity you could do, if your parents allow you to, is get some bee-friendly flowers from your research or seeds and start a honeybee garden. It's always great to start a pollinator garden, especially in the spring. So even if it's only one tiny little pot that's outside your window or on your balcony or on your front step or any of it, you might see a lot of bees visiting it during the springtime. So that's a nice at-home activity you can do. And then if you guys are interested in learning more about bees, you can visit my website, regenlives.com. I have a handout that goes with this lesson, and also on that handout has all of these resources. A website I love is girlnextdoorhoney.com. She's a bee educator and she's located in San Diego, California. She also does a lot of swarm removals. And so she posts these amazing videos of removing these massive swarms from people's houses. And so following her on Instagram is really fun. But she also has a couple books. I like this book the best, The Little Book of Bees, An Illustrated Guide to Extraordinary Lives of Bees. It's a great resource for all sorts of bees and like an intro to honeybees and other pollinating bees. Other great websites that are nonprofit organizations that deal with pollinators are greatsunflower.org, bumblebeewatch.org, and xerces.org. And all of these will allow you to personally participate in citizen science. So for instance, counting and tracking bumblebees. You can add the number to the website and contribute to science and research. So other books, there are also The Bees in Your Backyard, 100 Plants to Feed the Bees, Victory Gardens for Bees, and Queen Spotting, also by Hillary, is her other book that's really fun. It's a great intro to beekeeping if you're interested in keeping your own bees. And it's also fun because she has all these pictures of bee frames, and you have to, it's like Where's Waldo? Try to find the queen. It's fun. And then YouTube accounts that have a lot of great videos on beekeeping and beehives is Butts Bees LLC has great ones. This is a little bit more for adults because it's on the ins and outs of beekeeping. But if you're really, really interested in beekeeping, it's a great one. And then Beekeeping with Maddie is the best one for kids. She has, I think, about 13 intro videos for kids on beekeeping, and she's really fun. She's located in the UK, I believe. And they're great videos if you would like to look at them. All right, that is it for us. Thank you so much for joining our introduction to a beehive. We will be probably making more videos on our beehive throughout the spring and summer, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much.